Today we will be discussing social context in second language acquisition, and under this heading we are going to first of all look at language community and communicative competence. In order to understand language community, first of all we must try to figure out what we mean by community. The word community has been derived from Latin origin and has been used in English language since the 14th century. It refers to both social grouping development and the nature of the relationship among the members of that community. Social grouping development, that how a group of different peoples, they are joined together to form a certain group, and how these groups evolve and develop over the period of time. And along with that, the relationships that these people enjoy and how the relationships also develop and grow with the passage of time. Key characteristics include common people as distinguished from those who enjoy certain ranks and authority. It's relatively a small society. It's a small society because we are talking about community, and since we are discussing community in terms of social groups, so therefore it is basically a relatively a small society that constitutes this community. The people of a district, basically. The quality of holding something in common. So that is a key factor of certain community, that they hold something common. Maybe it can be their cultural norms, religion, way of dressing, language. A sense of common identity and characteristics. So sense of common identity comes from belonging to a certain culture, certain religion, a certain social and political background. All these are the characteristics of a community. Language community refers to a group of people who share knowledge of a common language. So language community is a community which share a knowledge of common language. The language is common to all the participants within that community. Language and culture are closely connected to each other, as language plays a very important role, a vital role in the perpetuation of a culture, preservation of a culture, or maybe a driving force behind any culture. Multilingual is often a member of more than one language community. So multilingual is a person who can speak more than one language, and monolingual is somebody who belongs to one language community and who is able to speak only one language. Now they differ in terms of knowledge of rules, of the appropriate choice of language for a given social context to develop competence. Now both these differ in terms of the knowledge of the rules of a certain language and how they use those language in social contexts to develop competence in terms of their verbal choices of words or written choices of words. So their competence is highly dependent on the choices that they make in terms of their understanding of both languages, first language as well as the second language. This leads us to another area of discussion, that is discourse communication. That is social groups' common ways of using language to meet social needs. So discourse communities actually are the ways, social ways in which people use language to meet their social needs. We are going to discuss now, explain the discourse communities and the characteristics that it has. Language community and discourse community. Discourse community refer to groups that have goals or purposes and use communication to achieve these goals. According to Swales, it is possible, of course, that there is no need to clarify the concepts of discourse community. Why? Because it will be nothing more than a translation of the long established concept of speech community. So they say that discourse community is not different from speech community, because whatever speech community has, that is basically translated in the discourse of the speech or the use of the language. Now, 6 characteristics of discourse communities have been identified Number one is a discourse community has a broadly agreed set of common public goals. Now, for example, in terms of teaching profession, you will see that the professors or academia has certain common public goal for which they will be interpreting or using the language. Second is a discourse community has mechanism of intercommunication among its members. They will be having internet, email channel, coordination meetings. All this is something that a mechanism has in terms of intercommunication. A discourse community uses its participatory mechanism primarily to provide information and feedback. So teaching feedback, meetings where they participate, research and seminars in terms of gathering information and getting feedback. A discourse community utilizes and hence possesses one or more genres in the communicative furtherance of its aim. These genres are basically the specialization that they have in certain areas, and they need specializations and the furtherance of its aim, keeping the discourse in a given situation. In addition to owning genres, a discourse community has acquired some specific lexemes, which is what? Specific vocabulary, specific language or words that are specific to the specialization. And then the last is the discourse community has a threshold level of members with a suitable degree of relevant content and discursal expertise. So basically the threshold of minimum requirement of the qualification that a person has or he or she has in order to belong to that discourse community, only then he or she is eligible to be a part of that discourse community. Communicative competence. Communicative competence can be defined simply as what speaker needs to know to communicate appropriately within a particular language community. It is not only about knowing the language, knowing the structure of the language, which is grammar, vocabulary, phonology, all these, although a very important linguistic units, and the understanding of these units is very important, but communicative competence requires more than that. It requires the ability to know what to speak or not, what to say to whom, and how to say it appropriately in a given scenario. So communicative competence is knowing about language and then knowing how to use that language in a particular community. So you have mind competence and then world performance. Now, under mind competence, you see language, extra-linguistic codes, cultural values, forming the language abilities and behavior and leading to communicative events. Language is the communicative competence in language used in the events, intercultural awareness of the critical points between his/her native language and language of the event. Extra-linguistic codes is intercultural awareness of the critical point, for example, interpersonal distance, value of objects, etc., and when two or more cultures are present in the event. Then you have cultural values, which are intercultural awareness of the critical points in the communicative use of time and space in the sense of belonging to a group, in the expression of hierarchy, respect, status, saving the face, etc. So all these are the cultural values. Now they lead to constructing language abilities, which means knowing how to work language, and then behavior abilities, knowing how to face intercultural problems and situations. They lead to the world performance, which is communicative events where two or more cultures are present, although a single common language is used. Differences between monolingual and multilingual communicative competence are due to the social functions of first and second language, and also not only the first and second language learning, but also the differences in terms of cultural learning or learning of two different cultures. First language learning basically is for the children, and it is done through the socialization process that the children acquires by picking up the language that is being spoken around him or her. And second language learning may be part of second language cultural learning and adaptation, but the relationship of second language acquisition to social and cultural learning differs in terms of the circumstances. So where we see the first language is more of a natural socialization process based, over here it is the circumstances which determine the acquisition process. To conclude, language community refers to a group of people who share linguistic knowledge of a common language and its use and culture perpetuation. Communicative competence is knowing about language and having the ability to use that language appropriately in a particular community.